Welcome to Compass Points, the weekly podcast for CompassKnox.com. CompassKnox.com is your best source for news and politics in Knoxville and Knox County. Your hosts today are Scott Barker and Jesse Mayshark, the founders of CompassKnox.com. You can find their daily in-depth coverage and subscribe at CompassKnox.com. The Compass Point podcast is brought to you in conjunction with Almost an Agreement. Almost an Agreement is a layman's attempt to get a handle on the workings in government and politics that we deal with every day. Check them out at almostanagreement.com or subscribe for free on your favorite podcast provider. If you'd like to learn more about the topics discussed on today's podcast, go to CompassKnox.com and subscribe for in-depth coverage and much more. And now, here are your hosts, Scott and Jesse from CompassKnox.com.
Welcome to Compass Points, the podcast produced by those of us here at CompassKnox.com, those of us being me, Jesse Mayshark, and my colleague, cohort, co-founder, co-everything, Scott Barker. How are you doing, Scott?
Doing great, Jesse. How are you doing?
I'm fine.
Good.
So I feel like we should note something before we really launch into this week's episode, which is that this episode is going to be, or we're taping it on Friday, but it's going to be released on Sunday, May 1st. And do you know what Sunday, May 1st is, Scott?
May Day?
It is May Day, but think history of Knoxville. Think 40 years ago today. What happened in Knoxville?
There was some kind of fair that went on, or
like one of these like weekend festivals.
Something like that.
Yeah, the World's Fair came to Knoxville 40 years ago today. I was not here. Were you there, Scott? Did you ever go to the World's Fair?
I was here. I actually came back a couple of times. I was actually in school and went to the fair. The statute of limitations has run out a couple of times. I snuck into the fair without paying an admission charge.
Wow.
So yes, I'll confess. I'm getting older, so I need to confess my sins.
Yeah, be careful. I mean, the city is looking for money these days.
Well, there's no it's only hearsay and you know, I don't think anybody would.
I feel like everybody I know who was here then, and I guess this is probably the age of the people I know because they're all people who were, you know, younger then, maybe college age or in their early 20s. But to me, it sounds like for a lot of the people who lived here, it was just kind of like a nonstop party for, 4 or 5 months.
Oh, it was. It was definitely a nonstop party. There were a lot of people who, had passes and went almost on a daily basis or at least a weekly basis. The building that is now currently known as the Foundry was the Stroh House.
I hear stories about
the Stroh House was quite a happening place during the fair, and so it was kind of the epicenter of the debauchery that went along with the fair.
Right.
There were things like exhibits and rides and things like that too. So.
Well, happy anniversary to the World's Fair, and there are various events going on throughout this year that you can look online and find out about. There's an exhibit down at the East Tennessee History Center and some other things. So, moving on to the present day, we've had a pretty busy week here in Knoxville, and I think we should probably start right off with we had a fairly major announcement from the city of Knoxville on Thursday.
Yes, Mayor India Kincannon announced that Paul Noel will be the next police chief, replacing Eve Thomas, who is retiring, effective on May 1st. Noel is currently the deputy commissioner of the New Orleans Police Department in New Orleans, Louisiana. Deputy commissioner he's essentially the number 2 guy in the department down there, and he's been the chief of detectives for the past couple of years. He comes to Knoxville as a nationally known, very prominent advocate for police reform. And New Orleans, the New Orleans Police Department gets a lot of, it's got kind of a bad reputation, but it's changed over the years. They, for the past 10 years, they've been under a federal order to stop violating people's civil rights, and essentially. And part of that was a new training program that he helped put in place, and it's all about making sure that police officers hold each other accountable and prevent each other from doing things that they shouldn't be doing. Like any kind of excessive force. If an officer starts to be a little rough with a suspect, the expectation is for other officers to intervene and keep that
right.
from
And he's
happening.
kind of made the point that he's not because we know there's this idea of the blue line that the police officers protect each other, and so he's saying that he's not wanting people to rat out people. He's not looking for people to report them to other people, which of course, some of us might think, well, they should do that too. They should probably report that to other people. But that it sounds like he's trying to work within that mentality to intervene before something happens rather than have to decide whether or not to report it after the fact.
Yeah, it's basically, the idea is to train officers to look out for each other and to keep one another from doing something wrong, rather than to report somebody for after the fact for doing something wrong or covering it up because you don't want to report somebody. So the idea is to keep bad things from happening to begin with, and it's an approach. One of the examples he gives is the George Floyd incident, where he, obviously he had the one officer who had his knee on Floyd's
who was convicted of murdering him.
Who was convicted of murdering him, yes. Yeah. And but you had three officers who just stood by, and his point is one of those officers, if not all three, should have intervened to stop the abuse, and so that's kind of the thrust of the training. It's been replicated all across the country. About more than 200 police forces use this kind of training now, including the police departments in New York and Los Angeles. So it's not a kind of a unproven approach. It apparently is, and it's shown results in New Orleans. Federal judge just last week said that the city of New Orleans Police Department has made a lot of strides since they went under federal oversight 10 years ago for civil rights violations, and they're about to come. The feds are about to step back and let them go on their merry way, and that's because they've made so much progress. So he's going to be coming. He starts in June. He is really outgoing, very. He's got when you talk to him, he's got kind of a good command presence. I think that you associate with a police chief. So I think that he's we'll see how he adapts to the police department, how the police officers adapt to him, and also culturally. He grew up in New Orleans and has worked his entire career in New Orleans, and so East Tennessee and Knoxville's completely new to him. So.
And do you have any sense, obviously there's been a lot of scrutiny of KPD in recent years, lots of allegations and some confirmed reports of, racist behavior in the ranks, sexist behavior in the ranks. Any sense of whether people who are looking for a change agent in KPD are happy with this pick, or is there still going to be a lot of skepticism?
Well, I think there's going to be, first of all, I think there's going to be skepticism no matter what, because of the scrutiny KPD has been under for the last couple of years. However, I think that the people who've been calling for reform of KPD If he checks pretty much all those boxes, he has, he's got a proven track record of getting results, and those who aren't necessarily in favor of big police reforms, and want KPD to just be a law enforcement agency and fight crime. He's got results there too. I mean, one of the things, he's been the chief of detectives for the last 2 years in New Orleans. That's been part of his responsibilities, and their homicide solve rate has dramatically increased. He reorganized the detective department detective unit to do that, and so he seems to have kind of that blend of being a stickler for law enforcement and someone who thinks that law enforcement needs to change to do better, to better serve their communities.
All right. Well, it'll be interesting to see how he settles in. And there will be a KPD crisis at some point, we know, because there always is a KPD crisis sometime in the future. Yeah. And I think that'll be one really interesting thing to watch, is how does he handle sort of his first real stress test, which is almost inevitably out there. We had another interesting thing this week that I wouldn't say we exactly broke this story, although I guess of the media outlets in town we did. I think we're still the only ones who have really reported it out, but it had been circulating on social media for a little while, which are these allegations about school board candidate Steve Triplett, who's running in the Republican primary in the 7th District, which covers Halls and Powell and areas in North Knox County. And so one thing I wanted to talk about a little bit with this, Scott, was just kind of our own process. I think that reporters in general, the primary election is this Tuesday, May 3rd. The closer we get to elections, we tend to get a little nervous about reporting things that are clearly of a political nature, designed to, maybe damage one candidate or another. And that's really what this is, right? So how did we go about deciding whether or not to pursue this story?
Well, one thing is, yeah, you're right. You're absolutely right. Some news outlets have a kind of a blackout period in the final days before an election, where and that is, it's not really to hide the news. What it is to, if somebody makes an allegation about a candidate 3 days before the election and that candidate can't respond immediately, then you've got this unchallenged accusation just hanging out there when people are going to the polls, and to avoid that, journalists tend to be a little leery when you get close to election time. But on this instance, we still had almost a week when we found out about this before the election and before election day. And one thing is, we first were alerted to all this chatter on social media.
And we might as well go ahead and say there were allegations that in a prior job, Steve Triplett, who's now a general manager at a Chick-fil-A restaurant in Fountain City, but he had been principal of a Christian school in Ohio, and that the allegations were that he had left that job or been compelled to leave that job because of misappropriation of funds.
Yeah, and so one of the things that we did was, check it out. We didn't just, obviously didn't just report what something that serious, just didn't report what people were saying on social media, but we decided to go ahead and look into it and to see if there was anything to the allegation. Now, one of the things is, people might say, well, that's just what his opponent was saying. Well, yeah, that it was what his opponent's supporters were saying. So we looked into it to see what it actually happened. And Jesse, you were the one who actually contacted the church. So.
Yeah, it was Cleveland Baptist Church, and I talked to the pastor there, and he wanted to be very clear that none of this information had been circulated by people affiliated with the church themselves. This goes back to 2013 was when Steve Triplett left the church there, so it's been 9 years. And it was never disclosed publicly. There were no legal charges or anything, but he didn't want to go into details, and neither did Steve Triplett when I talked to him. But the pastor at the church there, Pete Folger, did confirm that there were serious problems. He said he left here for a reason and it was not a good thing, that there was money missing that had to be repaid by Triplett, and that he said it caused a lot of heartache in the church. It was this was a significant event, clearly, in the life of that church and the school that it's affiliated with. And so with that information, of course, we asked Triplett for his response, and he didn't want to talk about it too much. He emphasized that he had paid back anything that anyone determined was owed. He subsequently, after we wrote about this in our email newsletter this past week, he put up a post on social media himself, kind of saying that there had been disagreements about operations and spending and that he had decided to resolve those by just paying back any money that was disputed, which is the kind of statement that, raises a lot of questions in and of itself. It doesn't it doesn't make it sound like it was a dispute over whether to spend money on, one thing for the school or something else for the school. Like, obviously, there was some money that needed to be repaid. But that's kind of where we are. There are former students from the school who have also been active on social media. And I believe supporters of Sherry Garrett, who is Steve Triplett's Republican opponent, have certainly been pushing these allegations online, and we talked to one of them. But it really appears to have originated with former students from the school in Ohio who found out that Triplett was running for school board here and started posting things on Facebook and elsewhere trying to call attention to this. And we've heard from some of them as well. So I don't know, what all of that means in terms of its implications for the election. We're going to find out very soon because the primary is on Tuesday. Triplett was probably favored, I would think, to win that primary before these disclosures. He's certainly got support of some major Republican Party donors. He's raised a lot more money than Sherry Garrett has. If he wins the primary, he would have an opponent in the general election. And these issues, are probably going to linger. There's probably some more there that we and probably some other media in town will look at too. But it was an interesting thing, and I wanted to talk a little bit about how we, because I think sometimes people wonder how reporters make their decisions, and I think for me certainly it was the fact that we were able to verify, the allegations to some degree with the pastor from the church, and also that the allegations themselves had to do with misappropriation of funds, which I think is one of those offenses. If you find out somebody's running for office and they had a DUI 25 years ago, that doesn't necessarily feel like earth-shaking information, but misappropriation of funds of any kind for somebody seeking public office, I think, is the kind of thing voters probably would like to know about.
Yeah, and voters can they can think that is a disqualifying thing, or they can say he made restitution and he's
and
gone
9 years ago.
9 years ago, he's gone on with his life. He's
Sure.
changed, whatever happened then, and that's one thing, we don't know exactly what happened then. But whatever happened then hasn't been repeated apparently, and so we're okay with that. But that's up for the voters should decide that with the knowledge of what happened.
Right. It's not something that you want to find out after you vote
No,
for somebody. No. So speaking of voting, early voting wrapped up this past week and came in right around 21,000 votes in early and absentee ballots, down a little bit from the same election 4 years ago in 2018 when these same offices were on the ballot. Actually, fewer offices because all the judges and everything weren't on the ballot then, but there were actually a few more votes then, about 23,000. Why do you think this election maybe hasn't ignited a tremendous amount of excitement?
Well, a couple of reasons. One, the main reason I think is there are fewer contested primary elections. The Democratic side, there are only two, and one of them is a district race. So there's only one county-wide contested primary. On the Republican side, there are several that aren't contested either. So it's when there aren't that many contested races, you just have fewer people who will show up to vote. They'll wait till the general election to vote.
Yeah, and 4 years ago, there was both a contested sheriff's primary and a pretty heavily contested county Republican mayor's primary,
Right.
which, of course, Glenn Jacobs very narrowly won in a three-way race, and so that probably had to do with that, too. You mentioned Republicans and Democrats. Talk a little bit about the breakdown between Republican versus Democratic ballots and what it might mean about who's actually voting in these primaries.
Yeah, one of the interesting things when you look at the numbers is that in this year's primary, about 80% of the ballots, and being loose here with the percentages, about 80% of the ballots have been filled out in the Republican primary, and only about 20% in the Democratic primary. And what makes that really odd is that typically in countywide general election races, the split is more 60-40 or 62-38, that kind of range. So a lot fewer people are voting in the Democratic primary in this election than in the Republican than you would expect from
as a proportion
those.
Of the population.
Yeah, as a proportion of the electorate, that's true.
But that doesn't mean Democrats are not voting. Right?
It doesn't mean that, because in Tennessee, we don't have to register as a party member. You can, when you go into the polling place, they ask you what, do you want a Republican ballot or a Democratic ballot? And you can pick whichever one you want. And so we don't know how many, but it stands to reason that a lot of people who are voting in the Republican primary are Democrats who are not voting in their own primary, but voting in the Republican primary. That's one thing that and anecdotally, you get a lot of that. You talk to a lot of people who tend to vote Democratic, who when in these situations, the sheriff's race, for example, where you've got two Republicans running for sheriff, and there's not going to be a Democrat in the fall. There's not a Democrat in the primary, and so there won't be one in August. So if you want to make have a say in who the sheriff is, you have to vote in the Republican primary, and that is kind of the thought process behind people that who do that, and apparently quite a few people are doing that.
Yeah, and that has the potential in a close race certainly to have some impact.
It does, but it also has another impact. It does have an impact on the Democratic primary. Now the Democratic primary for mayor has 3 candidates, and depending on which Democrats cross over and which ones vote in the Democratic primary, that could skew that, because one candidate's more natural supporters might be those who cross over, and they don't get as many votes, and they might lose or come in second or whatever. I mean, it just could alter the outcome of the Democratic mayoral primary, even though they're not voting in the Democratic primary.
Right. True. Well, another thing I wanted to mention very quickly that happened this week was the resolution of a dispute that's been going on for more than a year in the sheriff's office over whether one particular employee gets to have a car provided by the sheriff's office. And this is Martha Dooley, who is the former communications manager for the sheriff's department under former mayor J.J. Jones. Was not retained in that role by current Sheriff Tom Spangler. She's been moved into more or less a kind of clerical customer service role. She's kept her salary. She's still making over $100,000 a year. But she also had a car that had been issued to her, as she said, as part of her compensation by previous sheriffs. And Spangler took away that car, saying it wasn't part of her compensation and that she didn't need it because she just has an office job. She's not out driving around. And it was just a car she was using for her own use. It was her own personal vehicle, essentially, but owned by the sheriff's department, and she had a gas card to cover all of her gas. So she had basically a free car and free gas being provided. Spangler took it away. She appealed that to the county's Merit System Council, and we've spent basically a year going through Byzantine legal arguments which have extended all the way up to whether or not the Merit System Council itself is legally constituted. That is still before a court to decide. But the question of whether Martha Dooley gets to get her car back was decided on Thursday by the Merit System Council, which is a 3-member volunteer board, and they decided she should. They said, yes, Spangler acted, that his actions were of a political nature, and that's one of the things the Merit System Council is there to protect sheriff's employees against, is any kind of political retaliation by the sheriff or the administration, and that it was part of her compensation, and she should have the use of the car and the gas card restored to her. So I'm going to have a write-up about this in Monday's Compass, where we'll go in a little bit more to the, as I said, fairly complex, sometimes headache-inducing legal arguments behind it. But the net result of it is that whoever wins that sheriff's primary on Tuesday, whether it's Jones or Spangler, apparently Martha Dooley is going to get to keep her car. So that'll be interesting to watch.
Yeah, the whole idea of who gets to have a car and who doesn't in any government is kind of can be a political football, and this certainly has become one. One thing that that your reporting showed is that while Dooley's had this vehicle and apparently is supposed to use it to go to and from work, but apparently hasn't these types of things are always ripe for abuse, for somebody taking a car on vacation or doing whatever. Apparently she didn't do any of that, so at least her gas charges line up. So your reporting showed that. So this is purely about whether she should get the car or not, and so we got the ruling that she should, and we'll see what happens from there. And
the sheriff's office could still appeal this. They're already in court on another case having to do with the Merit System Council. They might go ahead and appeal this one to court too, and just kind of drag it out. I suppose if J.J. Jones wins the primary, he's already said that he thinks she deserves the car, and so if he is actually the next incoming sheriff, I don't think she has to worry. But if Spangler wins the primary, I have a feeling that the fight may not be over. Another thing that happened this week, the school board approved a proposed budget for next year, $591.5 million spending plan, up 9% from the budget they adopted last year, which is a big jump, fueled by surging sales taxes. And we sat down to talk to a school board member, Virginia Babb, about that budget. And we also took the opportunity to talk to her about her own decision not to seek re-election this year, and how that was shaped by the shift to partisan school board races and some of her concerns about what partisanship is going to do to school board politics. And let's go ahead and go to that interview. So joining us this week, we have Virginia Babb, who is currently the school board representative for the 4th District in West Knoxville and West Knox County. She is not running for re-election this year, and that's one of the things we're going to talk about. But first, we're going to talk a little bit about the school budget, which was approved, the recommended school budget, which was approved by the school board unanimously last week. Virginia, thanks a lot for joining us.
Sure. Nice to talk to you.
So let's talk about this budget. Superintendent Bob Thomas, who is retiring at the end of June, has been with the district for 49 years, said that it may be the best budget he's ever seen. What's so great about this budget?
I think it's a good budget because we were able to fund the things that we wanted to. Before I got on school board, I saw a lot of years where it was, where do we cut? Where do we cut? Where do we get rid of things? And we have just been in a booming economy with good sales tax, and that is allowing us to really fund things that we have wanted to. We've been able to give teachers the raises that we wanted to. I think as a county, we overall don't think our employees are paid high enough, but we do have to work in the boundaries of our budget on paying them correctly. But we were able to give a 4% raise. And I think even better, we were able to give an 8% raise to some of our lowest paid workers, like our custodians, our TAs. And really, even that 8% raise is not getting them to a wage that really is comparable and compatible with what's going on in our economy right now, but it's a start. And so we were able to add some positions that really needed to be added around the county. We were able to get some counselors at the elementary school level, some social workers at the high school level, just supports that we continue to feel that we need. And so I think that's why we were all very happy about this budget.
I thought it was interesting that Superintendent Thomas said that you're adding some new positions at schools that have growing populations so that you can keep the teacher-student ratios where they need to be, but not cutting any positions at some schools that have seen flat or declining enrollment. I guess, why do you think that's important?
I think they're trying to give some leveling out instead of making drastic cuts, but I do think that's something that's going to have to be looked at next year. I think they've tried to have a couple of years of not having volatility, of cutting positions and changing too much staffing at certain schools. But if a school's demographic has really gone down, I think we are going to have to look at that. I think that's some hard decisions going forward. I think that is something Dr. Ricewick is going to be inheriting on this budget, is to really look at where we're needing it. And especially when we are hard pressed to find teachers and special ed workers and, speech therapists and stuff like that. Are there places that we can really, it's not, I don't think we're ever probably going to end up having to get rid of those people, but is there another position that would be better filled by them than where they currently are?
And one thing the district's dealing with, although some schools have growing populations, the district as a whole is actually down, 1,500 students in the last couple of years. Is there any sense, is that just because of the disruptions of the pandemic, or are we, I know there's been talk about sort of a leveling out of school enrollment growth overall. Like, what's the long-term picture there?
I really think it's a pandemic issue. I think for a lot of families, and I think with what happened with Knox County schools, where we shut down school for, the end of, is it 2019? I'm getting 2020. And we shut down school. And over the summer, a lot of parents had to decide what to do about their kids. And when they could make that decision, some went to homeschooling, some went to private school. And then once they got to those schools, they were happy and didn't make a shift back. So I really see it as probably a pandemic issue. I'm also a realtor, and I'm just seeing the growth we're having with families moving here, that I just don't see it as a long-term decrease in our schooling. I just don't see that that's happening in Knox County. I think we're very much a growing populace here. So I don't know that we're going to have huge growth in our numbers, but I think that there will be growth. Right now we just don't even have enough housing for the people that are trying to buy houses here. So I do think our schools are going to grow. I think what we're dealing with is there are schools that are underpopulated in certain areas of town, and then schools that are very overpopulated, where it happens is in West Knoxville, where the bigger growth is.
Right. And you can't just move those empty classrooms at one school to another.
No, you can. And you can't have a teacher. When you have ratios, you can't have a teacher. Sometimes you end up with two teachers where really 1.5 teacher would be sufficient, but especially at an elementary school level, you can't. So I think we're going to have to look really at some zoning issues going forward. And I think with some, we're going to have the Northwest School coming online in the Carnes, Hardin Valley area. Few years down the road, we'll have a Farragut elementary school. And I think we are going to have to look at some of this zoning, even across the county, and how do we disperse populations a little bit better?
Which, yeah, go ahead, Scott.
No, I was going to ask, since you are a realtor as well as a school board member, and you're intimately involved with this, is there a way for the county to get ahead of these changes? Like in Hardin Valley, you're having to add a wing to the school, the
Right.
newest high school in the county, and you're having to add a wing to it. Is there a way to get ahead of any of these changes, or does it just come suddenly, and then you wake up one day and find out that, we've got 250 kids with no classrooms to put them in?
Yeah, I think this is, and it's something that I have really been challenged by on Knox County Schools, that I do not think that there is enough communication between Metropolitan Planning Commission, the county, and the schools about growth. I will see huge, subdivisions being planned, and when I ask about growth and how that's going to hit the schools, I always get told, oh, it's really not going to affect schools. And there's just no way that I think, I just don't buy it. I really don't. And so, and one thing I have been happy about when, with the new Western Heights, I think it's Western Heights redevelopment that's talked about, I know they're waiting on a grant, but I love the fact that KCDC came and talked to us about that, because I think everybody on school board, it was like our eyes were widened, like we can't wait till after that goes in to look at the effects of Beaumont and the other feeder schools if there's going to be a huge population growth over in that development. So that's where I feel like there's got to be better communication. I think, you know, I'm on a realtor board kind of talking about this and policies and growth and things like that, that we have just got to be as a community talking more and talking about development and stop being so reactive that we've got overcrowded classrooms, you know, portables all over the place before we realize we need a school. I mean, we know that development's coming, and there's got to be a way to better foresee that in our planning.
Right. And as Scott mentions in the capital budget, you all also approved this past week, there's money in there for expansion at Hardin Valley, at Sturkey Elementary, and also looking to actually build a whole new school out in Farragut, right?
Right. Right. I mean, and that's where, you know, right now, that is where you see the growth. And I do think this is where our county has got to be more looking ahead of when you look at the areas of town, which when you really look at Carter, Gibbs, South Knoxville, there is a lot of room for development. But that's right now. And I think it's really infrastructure. When I've asked questions about why our neighborhood's not going out there, I hear it's for infrastructure reasons. And I don't know enough about development to really get into that. But I do think as a county, we've got to figure out a way to shift everything from the growth going on just in one sector of our county.
Well, so you are wrapping up your first and what I guess will be only term on school board, elected in 2018, the first time. I'm curious, you know, sort of what are your big picture lessons from your time on school board? It's been a pretty unusual time. I guess you had about a year and a half before the COVID pandemic and then a couple of years with the COVID pandemic. You know, just walk us through the experience of learning to be a school board member and all of that.
Well, what I have learned is you never know what's going to be a big issue. I mean, before COVID ever hit, which no one predicted, and, you know, anybody running a business or, you know, in government, no one was prepared for that. And I think we all realized looking back, we could have done a better job. But before we ever even got to COVID, I look at three big things that kind of went on school board before that. I mean, we had, there was sort of talk about, is Career Magnet a relevant school and we need to keep it open? And we had a lot of conversation about that. I think that was probably the first big issue when I first got on school board that came up. We had, whoever knew moving our headquarters to the TVA tower from AJ would end up being such a big controversy, but that ended up being a huge controversy. And once again, I sort of hated it because it had nothing really to do with educating our kids. And then the third big one was the whole issue over Bible release time. So it was very funny to me, like the things that really got people passionate. And what I really learned is it's not really, the Career Magnet one was the only one that was really about kids' education and about what we're doing in the classroom. And that's what is sort of disheartening, is what really gets people excited and fired up has nothing really to do with education a lot of times. I mean, it's been mass, it's been Bible release time, it's been whether we move our, you know, corporate headquarters or whatever. So it is a little disheartening sometimes how little people seem to care about curriculum. How do we move kids forward? I think people do care, but they don't engage a lot on that. I think it's much more just about their own child. So I think that's probably been one of the more eye-opening things for me.
Yeah, it is interesting, like looking at the school board agendas from month to month, 90 to 95% of those agendas, first of all, passes unanimously, often on consent, and generates no public discussion at all, including things dealing with education, you know, sort of the core functions of the school system. And it tends to be those sort of like flashpoint cultural issues and so forth that really bring everybody out.
And I think one thing that sort of happened, and I think a lot of it is reactionary, is we got a new school board that was put in before I got on the school board that tried to really react to some things before. And we really got away from talking about academics and education and data and how we're moving kids forward. And I think towards the end of mine, I mean, we had a long period where literally COVID was about the only thing that took up our time. And we all realized we went backwards, and nobody is happy about that. And I think, no one's going to celebrate what we did. I think it's always, we're celebrating that we survived COVID more than anything else, rather than making any progress. But I think now that we're getting on the other side of that, we really are, as a board, I think, more conscious of we've got to do more about really delving in, looking at the data. And I think that's where you're starting to see more reporting out on where we're using some of this ESSER funding, because that's really what that's targeting is performance of our kids. Where can we do better? We're not where we want to be on kids reading and literacy. And now we've got some funds to really dive in deep on that, but we have to look at what is making a difference. And if we're trying things that are not making a difference, we have to look at other things.
It has been interesting. You're right. The last several months, I don't remember how long it's been since those monthly data reports have been part of the work session.
Yeah.
But there is starting to be more, talk about that in the meetings themselves. So, and the ESSER funding you mentioned, which of course is the federal funding, the sort of pandemic relief funding, I guess. What are the couple of things? Because that was $114 million? Is that the amount?
I think I don't know if that's, and that this is just my memory. I know I have it somewhere, but 114 either was the whole package or the last package of money, but it has been a lot of federal dollars. And, that's one thing we have to look at. It's not recurring money. So we have to look at things that we can do immediately with it. You don't want to add too many positions that will then have to be cut in a few years, but I think you do try to use the money in critical ways. And I think we're looking at how do we improve, and really it's through tutoring, how do we improve literacy, how do we improve mathematics? One of the things I would like to talk about is just the Forward Next Generation is a real exciting initiative that I think some of this money is being used for that, because I think everyone has kind of realized we got too far away from career technical training. And I don't know why that happened. I mean, that kind of happened in an era before I was probably even had my kids really involved at the high school level. But I think we're all realizing how important it is to do more training. It needs to be different. I mean, the kids have to be prepared for a different workforce, but we've got to do more with that. And I think this Forward Next Generation is going to be a great way, and also a great way to partner with our industry to really do the right kind of training, because I think that's one thing I'll fault Knox County on. We talk a lot about partnerships, but we don't know how to do them. We really want to partner with the community and we want to partner with businesses, but it's like a buzzword that nobody ever really teaches you how to do it. And so I think the Forward Next Generation is giving a framework on how to get industry partners. Like, don't have every high school in town asking, Stauffer's Electric or Lloyd's Electric to partner with them. They need to have one relationship with one school. And I think it really, I think that is going to benefit these schools and really benefit getting some kids really trained for the workforce, who maybe it'll train them to take a career in college that they never thought about doing, but hopefully will much better prepare some of our kids to go straight into the workforce or go straight into more apprenticeship type training.
And that Forward Next Generation learning, I mean, I know there's a lot of components to it, but that overall it's kind of providing some defined career tracks for kids, even starting in middle school, right? That will then kind of carry on through high school.
Yeah, I think it's really going to start trying to do in middle school, teaching kids about all the different options out there. And then in high school, each high school that chooses, and I think there's 7 or 8 high schools that will initially get into this, and then it'll expand out to all the high schools in Knox County. But initially, each high school will pick 3 or 4 tracks. And there will be within a track places for kids that want to go a college route and those that just want to go straight into career. It was very interesting. I got to go over to Nashville right before COVID hit and learn about it. And there was a kid that was a very artsy theater kid who was in like an aerospace track. So and he was able to articulate to us the skills that he was able to get out of the aerospace track, even though he had no desire to go into aerospace. So a lot of it is just teaching, workplace skills, those type of things within sort of a framework of a business industry setting.
Well, speaking of Nashville, another thing that happens in Nashville is the meetings of the state legislature. And last fall, during an emergency session, mostly to deal with pandemic-related issues, the legislature voted to essentially make school board races across the state partisan.
you can debate to what degree the law leaves that optional, but I think the net effect of it is that we're basically going to see partisan school board races, right, most places probably. And that was a big factor in you deciding not to run. So what was it about that decision that made, because initially you said you were going to run as an independent and then decided that was not going to fly?
Right. Yeah. So, I mean, I really, even talking to some legislators, I was sort of given hope that it probably would not pass initially, because as one legislator said, we're meeting for emergency reasons. Whether school board races become partisan or not is not an emergency, which I thought was perfectly logical. So I did not even think it was going to take place. You know what, it's now passed. The legislature did decide to pass it, which then allows the parties within a county to decide whether to have partisan races or not. And locally, our Republican Party did decide to do it. So then the Democrats have also decided to get into it. So, you know, it's passed. Initially, I was sort of like, I'll just run as an independent. And I think I am, because I ran as a nonpartisan, I'm pretty naive about politics. People will start talking about precincts and things like that. And I was very fortunate when I ran the first time that I ran unopposed. So I really didn't have to get into the nitty gritty of running a campaign. I had been very involved in the schools before I ran. And so I kind of had widespread support across my district when I ran the first time, and no one chose to run against me. So when I decided to run as an independent or put it out there, I sort of thought, okay, that's not a big deal. But then I had some people that contacted me, not to say that I couldn't do it, but kind of pointed out the difficulties in doing it. And when I really realized what would be involved, like we have a primary early voting ending today, and the primary election is next Tuesday. If I was an independent, I would not even show up on the ballot at all. Mm-hmm. Then the general election, I really would like to test the waters a little bit. I'm an incumbent. You know, I think I have some name recognition. If nothing else, people are tuned into school board races in school board meetings in a way they never have been before. That I think there is a possibility in my district I could have won as an independent. But I also, by the time I had to make the decision, I was just kind of tired of school board a little bit. I mean, I've enjoyed my time on it, but I really just didn't have it in me to do all the politicking that I saw I would have to do to win as an independent. And I'm very disheartened that they've decided to do it. I think when I decided not to run, I tried to talk to somebody else about running that I thought would be a good candidate. And I think, honestly, the partisanship kept them out of running. So I think it's going to keep some people that really care about schools. I mean, whether you think I'm the right person or not is beside the point. But I think that I got into it because I was an involved parent. And I think those type of candidates, if they really don't have political leanings, it's going to be a hard sell to get them to run.
Do you think it's going to change I feel like there are a couple of classic models of people who run for school board, and it's mostly traditionally involved parents, which was very much the route that you came up in, people who are engaged with their kids' school and parent-teacher associations and so forth. And then former educators, former teachers, former principals. Probably most school boards in America, those two categories make up most of the school board members. Sure. Do you think that having partisan races might change that? Is it going to change what kinds of people run for those positions?
I think so. I think we're even seeing it with this election right now. I think we see people running now on a single issue, and it really doesn't have much to do about education. I think a couple of people right now in the race are running almost solely on issues that came up because of COVID. And then, I'm even seeing it on our school board, where I sort of see some school board members almost making speeches to their constituency, which I just don't think we did when we ran nonpartisan. I mean, if people are really party affiliated, I think people know. I mean, if you're really a strong Republican or a strong Democrat, we see it in our city elections already. But like me, I'm kind of laughing because I've had both sides accuse me of being the other party. So I think when that happens, I really think that trying to truly shows I'm really not affiliated. Different decisions probably look like I lean one way or the other just because that's what happens. But I think it is going to really skew people. And I think what's going to happen is it's going to make people think about their decision in voting and how is this going to affect the part, like they're going to start, it's a party line that they're going to have to go with, which I just hate for schools. I don't see a benefit to it. I really don't.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Well, and you were, go ahead, Scott.
Well, one thing I was interested in is something you mentioned before about the issues that you wind up addressing are not necessarily issues you think you're going to address going
Right.
into it.
Exactly.
Uh, and now we have, like you said, some school board members who are campaigning more as partisans. Maybe they're thinking of more partisan issues they're going to bring up. Others who more like the way you did were thinking about purely education issues. And then over the next 4 years, they may confront other issues that have nothing to do with either one. And so when you're a voter, if you're looking at candidates, what qualities should they look for in a candidate who may end up facing these huge issues that no one's even talking about during the election?
Yeah. I mean, I really think as far as people that are running, you really need to look at why they're running. I mean, I've had some candidates I've talked to that really can't articulate very well why they're running. And I think, I don't think there should be just one issue you're running on. And I would hope really it's for the betterment of all the students in Knox County. I mean, we all come from a certain area of town, but it behooves me living in West Knoxville for the kids in Carter Gibbs area to do well, the kids at Austin East to do well, the kids in South Doyle to do well, because we need them to be the workforce and to draw employers here. So I don't need to just care about the kids in West Knoxville and how they're doing. And I think you've really got to have that heart for how do we improve education and how do you work with our administration? I mean, you really have to work with them and try not to be working against them, which doesn't mean you shouldn't challenge their decisions sometimes. I mean, I don't mind when I disagree to challenge them, but I think we really are here to support the central office administration, our principals and their work. So I think that those are some key things.
And on the issue of partisanship, you were quoted recently in a New York Times column, which mostly talked about the Tennessee law and really focused on Williamson County, where of course there's been a lot of conflict of various kinds. I'm just curious, of course, you get quoted in Compass and the New Sentinel and so forth a lot. What kind of response, if any, did you get from showing up in the New York Times?
Mostly very supportive. I mean, most of my people in my district, I feel like I've been supportive of me, even when I disagree with me. I mean, I have people all the time that they don't like what I've done or a decision I've made, but they appreciate the fact that I do school board. I mean, it's not an easy, popular job. You're not always making decisions that make people happy. So overall, I would say everybody's supportive. I did have one nasty person. And as I shared before this started, I got a lovely, not nice note in the mail today from someone. So, you get that with it. And I think I have been very fortunate, and I represent a district that I think is very, for the most part, supportive of education. And I have felt very supported as a school board member. I really have not felt attacked while I've been on school board, even through the whole COVID masking issue. I mean, people did not always agree with my decision, but I, for the most part, did not have people attacking me and being ugly. And I appreciate that. I mean, there was no way during COVID I could make everybody happy. So I appreciated the people that could see I was trying to be thoughtful about my decisions and make the best decision, even if it wasn't what agreed with them.
Well, just final question. You mentioned working with the administration. Obviously, you all just hired a new superintendent, John Ryswick, who's going to be starting in just about a month. I know you supported his selection. What are just a couple of major things that you hope to see from him? New initiatives, changes, things that will move the district in one way or another?
Sure. One thing I'm excited about, already talking to him about his vision and what he's doing, is really, and he's actually started a transition team. And I think that's really important to keep business, community people, keep in touch with them. I do think that is a problem we have with Knox County schools, is we always think we have the answers. And I think we've got a lot of smart people in Knox County schools. I'm amazed by the people that we have working as teachers, as administrators in central office. But I do think you can get very kind of tunnel visioned sometimes. So I appreciate that Dr. Ryswick has already gotten a very diverse transition team. And I think talking to him, he wants to be out in the community more. He wants to talk to people because I think that's where you've got to be approachable, and you can't always talk to every upset parent, but you've got to be seen as approachable and someone that can you can talk to, and you can, that you're open to hearing different sides of things and stuff like that. I do think we've got to really be focused, and I don't fault not Mr. Thomas about this, because COVID was a big kind of glitch in where we were moving forward, but we have got to get more on track about our academics and how do we move it forward, and how do we help all of our kids moving forward, no matter whether it's a, college that they're going to, or whether they're entering the workforce. We've got to have them prepared better when they leave our Knox County schools.
All right. Well, thanks very much. We appreciate the time and the thoughts, and I guess we'll be talking to you soon, I'm sure.
Thank you.
Now we come to the segment of our podcast where we answer reader questions every week on Compass Colloquy, which is the private Facebook group for Compass subscribers, one of many benefits of being a Compass subscriber. We ask our readers if there are any issues, topics, things that they want us to discuss on the show this week. And we did have a question from a reader wanted some thoughts on a lawsuit that has been filed against Knox County Schools and the city of Knoxville that was reported this past week by local reporter Jamie Satterfield, who is now writing for the Tennessee Lookout. And I think we both want to say that we're both very happy to see Jamie back in action. She's a terrific reporter who we've both worked with over the years. And it's great that she's got an outlet now at Tennessee Lookout. Make sure you check out TennesseeLookout.com. They do great work covering mostly state-level politics, but also news and issues around the state. So this lawsuit stems from an incident at Northwest Middle School that involves a police officer, a Knoxville Police Department officer assigned to the school. And officers in schools have been an issue of some discussion, sometimes controversy in the last few years. Obviously going back to the shooting of Anthony Thompson Jr. by a Knoxville Police Department officer at Austin East High School last year. In this case, according to the lawsuit, and also it's worth noting, according to body camera footage that Jamie herself reviewed, and she writes about extensively in her article, the officer suspected an 8th grade student of having marijuana in his backpack, handcuffed him, and then before he even searched the backpack, apparently got physical with him, took him into a separate room, and the lawsuit alleges, and there's documented evidence that the boy did need medical attention after this, apparently slammed his face into a table. That's the allegation. The officer apparently had an explanation that was, that the boy was trying to kick him and he was trying to restrain him and maybe leaned on him. In any case, there was a cut to the boy's face that required some medical attention, and the parents and the boy have sued. Of course, the school system is not talking about it, neither is KPD. They tend to not discuss pending litigation. But Scott, this case looks like it could be a test in various ways, right?
Yeah, I mean, for one thing, it is a yet another incident involving a KPD officer who's assigned to the schools, which has been as you mentioned, an issue. I mean, to the point last year that Mayor Kincannon talked about removing KPD officers from schools. That didn't go very far. Wasn't very well received, but I mean, it's been a bone of contention, and with the incoming chief, that could be a test of the training that he's going to be bringing from New Orleans to hold officers accountable for their actions to prevent things like this from happening. I don't know how that kind of training would. It's a peer intervention training where officers keep other officers from doing bad things, and it only works when there's more than one officer there. So I don't know if that would be there. But the whole idea of instilling a an atmosphere of and an expectation of accountability would, in theory, address situations like this.
And there weren't other officers there, but there were teachers and apparently a school principal involved in the situation, at least as alleged by the lawsuit. And certainly it could generate more discussion about how those relationships between school officials and police officers work. It also, yeah, go ahead.
Well, one thing is the training is based on the concept of the active bystander, where you have, and this would apply to the people who were there as well, in that anytime there is someone doing something wrong, the bystander who intervenes can can prevent things from getting worse. And there are ways to do that without putting yourself in danger and that sort of thing. And that's the police training is going to be applying that theory to police work, but it works in other situations as well, according to its proponents. So that whole active bystander and
right. It could apply to a principal. It could apply to a teacher.
Absolutely. If people in those positions are given that kind of active bystander training, where, I mean, obviously there are situations where the bystander would put themselves at risk by intervening, but there are ways to do it and ways to train people how to act in those situations, and that could be a possibility for others outside of the police department to learn how to do.
Well, one thing to mention here that I didn't mention is when they did eventually search the backpack, there was no marijuana. And the boy had some cigarillos, but which, of course, is a violation of school policy and so forth, but is not the kind of thing that would typically lead to an 8th grader being handcuffed, much less, physically handled by police. The other thing that this ties into is the school system just had another meeting this past week of its Alliance for Educational Equity, which is the latest evolution of it. It has, for the past 8 years, the school system's been involved, has had task force and committees looking at equity across racial and economic demographics in the student population, specifically focused on academic outcomes and on disciplinary measures. And what the data continue to show, the data that was just reported last week, was that students who are racial minorities and also students who are economically disadvantaged have much lower academic outcomes in general. Black and Hispanic students and students who are economically disadvantaged, and also particularly black students and students who are economically disadvantaged, of course there can be overlap between those two categories, have much higher rates of suspension than other students. And there's the school system is still analyzing its data, trying to get its data down to a level where it can really kind of do comparisons and understand what's going on there. There was some controversy in a session that I sat in on this past week where parents and community members who were there were basically saying, why are black kids getting suspended so much more than white kids? Brian Hartzell, who's the district's head of disciplinary procedures essentially, and who is black, it's worth noting, said that he really didn't believe that there was any racial difference, that students who commit the same kinds of violations are treated the same across the district. A lot of people in the audience did not find that persuasive. They don't really have the data yet to get down to the level of comparing one specific instance to another one to really weigh those, and so they say that that's what they're going to do. But obviously a case like this, which did involve an African-American student, is just going to raise more questions. And you had a white officer, a black student. I guess obviously we'll have to see how the case turns out.
Yeah, that's one thing that it's unfortunate that we don't have the data readily available. It seems to be something that would be easily generated, but using data on numbers of suspensions and the lengths of those suspensions and those kinds of things should go a long way to telling the school system exactly, if there's a problem and exactly where that problem lies. So.
All right. Well, thanks to our readers for the questions, and we will be back next week with more answers to your questions. If you are a Compass subscriber, you can join Compass Colloquy, and every Thursday we will be posting on there soliciting any kinds of questions or things that you're curious about. Looking ahead to next week, this is going to be a busy week also. First of all, as we mentioned earlier in the show, Tuesday is primary election day. So we will be covering all of the contested primaries in both parties. As we said earlier, most of those are Republican contested primaries. I think the ones people are going to be watching the most are the sheriff's race, first of all, most obviously, a couple of at-large county commission races that have generated some interest, and the school board primaries, particularly this one involving Steve Triplett, which I think people will probably be paying a little more attention to now with what's come out than they have in the past. Scott, do you have any thoughts about whether we're going to see any surprises here?
Well, I don't know if we'll see surprises. It's really going to be really interesting to see how the sheriff's race shakes out. Primarily because you have an incumbent in Tom Spangler, who is, normally the incumbent's pretty much a shoo-in, but then you have J.J. Jones, who was his immediate predecessor, who is practically running. He's running as, I might as well be the incumbent because I was just the sheriff 4 years ago.
Yeah, it's funny that you have two people running and all of their election material for both of them says sheriff right at the top. It's Sheriff Tom Spangler, Sheriff J.J. Jones.
And I've seen some of Jones's stuff that says reelect.
Right.
Sheriff reelect J.J. Jones.
Which is technically true. He was elected
technically
before.
true, yes. He was elected before, so he would be reelected, but normally that is reserved for the immediate incumbent. And but that one's a tough one to handicap. I think that generally speaking, when a sheriff runs for reelection, the sheriff has the pretty much the rank and file of the department, plus their family members and assorted people who are connected with them, pretty much as a block. With Jones and Spangler both being sheriffs, that could splinter that block. I don't know to what extent. But that will be really interesting.
Well, certainly neither you nor I have ever seen an incumbent sheriff lose a re-election bid in Knox County. It may have happened sometime in the past, but certainly predates my political awareness here.
Same here. I don't recall ever seeing that. I also don't recall ever seeing a former sheriff running against a sitting sheriff. So there are a lot of things that could be happening here. I think that seeing how that shakes out will be a real interesting thing on election night, and also the Democratic primary for mayor. I think that's kind of interesting to see because as we mentioned earlier, there appears to be a lot of crossover Democrats voting for the Republicans. The Democrats who are left, who are voting in the Democratic primaries, where that falls out, if that actually affects that race in any way, shape, or form.
3 Democratic candidates being Bob Fisher, Tyler Givens, and Debbie Helsley. So
Yes.
We will know the answers to those questions very soon. And if you are a Compass reader, you can read about it Wednesday morning because we will have coverage hot and fresh for you. Also, Tuesday night, City Council's meeting. What are they doing this week?
Well, City Council gets to take their first look at the budget that Mayor Kincannon recently proposed. That is a budget contains a complete restructuring of the city pay structure for city employees. They get big raises. But it also comes with a property tax proposal to pay for it, 50 cents on the rate, so this will be the first chance that council has had to look at it. It shouldn't be. This will be Tuesday night in the regular meeting. but it shouldn't be that. There shouldn't be a whole lot of discussion about it.
It's a bit of a symbolic vote, right?
Yes, it is symbolic. One of the quirks of Knoxville city government is, by charter, city council is required to pass the budget on first reading. It takes 2 readings to pass completely, but they are required by charter to pass it on first reading. Now, they can amend it for second reading all they want.
They can vote it down on second
They
reading.
can vote it down on second reading, but they've got to pass it on first reading. So it's almost a symbolic vote. I think that one thing that will happen, the prediction on my part, is that people who are opposed to the property tax increase will show up as members of the public to speak against it there, which they can do. And there's that's on the agenda, so there'll be time on the agenda for them to discuss it. So there will be that. It will also be interesting to see if council members, the council members who vote against it, because while there is a requirement that they pass it, and this has happened before, that a 1 or 2 council members could vote against it, and we already know one council member is dead set against it, and that's Janet Testerman. She has already come out publicly and saying that she was opposed to a property tax increase, which means she's opposed to the budget the way it is constituted currently, because it would have to be cut if there is no property tax increase.
And Janet Testerman, of course, just happens to be running in a Republican primary for state legislature.
Yes, that is exactly where I was going with that. She is running the 18th district which that seat became open because Eddie Manis decided not to run for re-election. She jumped into that, and so it's very difficult to city council was always nonpartisan, so it was not not as big a deal. But when you start running for statewide or for a state office, if you're on the Republican side, your tax votes are it's a litmus test.
And she's already being attacked in that race by other Republicans for not being Republican enough, for supporting some of Kincannon initiatives. So it seems very unlikely that she's going to want even a symbolic first reading vote in favor of this budget.
Even a symbolic vote, but she's already on record as saying that she's opposed to it, and I can't imagine that. And a symbolic no vote will not. The council would still be able to pass it. If she is the only symbolic no vote, or even if there are 1 or 2 others. So it would still pass. The charter doesn't say it has to pass unanimously.
Right.
It just says it has to pass.
5 votes.
So what would be interesting is if they didn't get 5 votes, and what they would have to do. I think that I don't think that will happen. I don't think that there's a risk of that happening. But Law Director Charles Swanson might want to just dust off that section of the law books and see what might happen then.
I mean, ultimately, if council doesn't pass a budget, the mayor's proposed budget just automatically takes effect, right?
Yeah, that's another one of those weird things about the city charter. Yeah, if they don't pass the budget at all, if they just completely, even if they reject the mayor's budget, if you get to the end of the fiscal year and there is no budget passed, then the mayor's budget automatically passes anyway. So
this is what they call a strong mayor system.
That is one reason it is the strong mayor system. There are a couple of reasons. That's one of them, and a lot of these are tied to the budget. Another one is tied to the budget. City council members don't have the ability to go in and change individual line items. For example, if they're looking at the police department budget and they don't like a particular program in the police department, they can't just cut that program out. They could reduce the overall appropriation by the same amount, but they can't. They have no authority to do that. Yeah, so it's sort
of the same situation that county commission is in regard to the school board, where they can reduce the total amount of money that the county provides to the school board, but the school board has total control over how they actually spend that money.
Yeah, it's virtually the same thing. They can only adjust gross figures. They can't adjust in individual programs. So even though council members might want to cut one program out and they reduce the overall budget of that department by that amount, the administration can say, well, no, we'll cut a different program. We'll leave that program in because we like that program. I mean, so it's so the mayor has most of the power when it comes to the budget, but council will they do have the authority to make changes if they want to. They certainly have the option to vote it down, and we'll see if anybody other than Testerman is going to go in that direction.
All right. And speaking of budgets, finally next week we've had the school system budget proposed. We've had the city budget. Now the full county budget is going to be proposed on Thursday by County Mayor Glenn Jacobs. And I think we can pretty confidently say that there will be no tax increase proposed by the county, unlike the city. Mayor Jacobs has made very clear that he has no intention of raising taxes while he's in office. And the school system itself makes up nearly 2/3 of the county budget. So really what the mayor is going to be outlining is the spending for the other third or so of the budget that he has more direct say over. So we will have full coverage of that, and we'll be back here to discuss it next week. And I think that about wraps us up, right?
I believe it does.
All right. Well, see you all next week.
Welcome to Compass Points, the weekly podcast for CompassKnox.com. CompassKnox.com is your best source for news and politics in Knoxville and Knox County. Your hosts today are Scott Barker and Jesse Mayshark, the founders of CompassKnox.com. You can find their daily in-depth coverage and subscribe at CompassKnox.com. The Compass Point podcast is brought to you in conjunction with Almost an Agreement. Almost an Agreement is a layman's attempt to get a handle on the workings in government and politics that we deal with every day. Check them out at almostanagreement.com or subscribe for free on your favorite podcast provider. If you'd like to learn more about the topics discussed on today's podcast, go to CompassKnox.com and subscribe for in-depth coverage and much more. And many thanks to William Wright for composing our theme song. Compass Points is a partnership of Barking Shark Media and Barbarian Productions, and recorded by Lord Seth A. Barber at Barbarian Studios, Knoxville, Tennessee.